Evening. Welcome. It is 5 o'clock and it looks like we are all here for this emergency meeting of the school committee tonight. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. So to the Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GLC 30A S18, I should have this memorized, in the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. The following meeting of the Somerville School Committee will be conducted by remote participation. We will post an audio recording, audio, video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website and local cable access government channels. And you can follow the links provided below. Oh, I didn't have to read that, but so welcome everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order with a moment of silence and then a salute to the flag. And tonight we dedicate our moment of silence to Mario Davila, director of our English language learner program, Sarah Davila, who has devoted years and years and years of heartfelt, thoughtful leadership in our district. So our heart goes out to her and her family. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United America, and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, Superintendent, will you take the roll call, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. Actually, Ms. Santiago is going to do the roll call.
Oh, thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Eleanor Barish.
Here.
Andre Green.
Here.
Laura Patone.
Here.
Ilana Krepkin.
Here.
Sarah Phillips.
Here.
Matt McLaughlin.
Here.
Mayor Curtatoni.
Present.
Emily Ackman. Carrie Norman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. So for this emergency meeting of the school committee, we have two items, public comment, and then the second item is to consider the Board of Health testing order and to discuss the draft flu testing policy and COVID-19 testing policy. But as has been our practice for the last, I don't know how many weeks, months, the Mayor Curtatoni is going to give us an update, and he's got members of his staff to join us. I think it's always good to start these meetings sharing the most recent information that we have. Mayor Curtatoni.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, for you members of the school committee, school staff, department staff, the C staff, including the Instant Command Unit and test working group, but for those of attendants and public who might watch this later. Is it possible, I know this every week and I didn't do it right last week on the share screen. I have the slides here. Is it enabled?
Ms. Santiago will check. Yeah.
So, okay, let me do this part here. Is that, well, is that right?
Is it possible to make it larger?
Working on it now. Just had it larger, I apologize. So, is that better?
That is better, thank you.
Okay. After the 10th meeting, the mayor's figuring it out. All right, thank you very much. Some of this updates, Madam Chairperson, for you and those watching, members of the school committee, there'll be familiar slides, so I'm going to click through them. There are some updates. Things are very fluid, as we know, and I appreciate everyone's work and collaboration, especially the input we're receiving from all of you and members of the public. Again, this is how we frame sort of the lens we look at all that we're considering in terms of the issue of how do we open schools safely and equitably for everyone. You know, what are the external factors we will continue to monitor? We'll talk about that shortly. And the internal factors, you've seen this before, that we can influence to prepare as external factors line up to allow for a safe opening of schools. On the internal safety measures, you know, Jeff Curley's talked about this before. I'll just touch upon it because we went over it. Nothing's changed. We're on track here. These are baseline safety measures were established over the summer, as we've mentioned before and discussed many previous meetings. This and this next slide here are included as a reminder because, again, they just represent one piece of the puzzle, one leg of the stool, as we mentioned before. We've gone over, mentioned building and ventilation. Rich Raish is not on the call tonight. He was here last week, but I'll provide any updates that we have. Again, the engineers, as you have heard me say before, have been working on these three groups in terms of priority and parallel on different timelines. As we know, Group 1 is the fastest track to reopen. You know, but Group 2 is on a fast track to reopen due to the existing systems in those schools, or to be behind Group 1, and Group 3 is the most difficult one due to the existing systems in all the schools. And the technical team is currently focusing on 1 and 2. And then after it will be 3. You've heard me talk about these 4 before. This previous slide deck is public. We'll make this one as well. As we talked about in the Somerville High School, it will obtain the necessary thresholds necessary to open. I'm on the wrong slide here. Necessary to open, but once the contract is done. So we have work to do to ready those spaces for occupancy according to our COVID-19 protocols that were established. We mentioned before that the Brown School must be analyzed really in the larger context, and that work will is already beginning as we move forward. Again, we've talked about the work plan. We went through all the work plan for all the schools as in previous meetings, talked about what we're trying to achieve. And Rich Raish touched upon some of these items. There are no updates there, and you know, whether it's on the Argenziano School, we talked about the Capuano work plan, West. And again, these slides were made available to the public at the previous meeting. Nothing has changed there for this conversation here. In terms of how our scheduling and Group 1, the first schools in Group 1, we saw this slide at the last meeting. Everything still holds here, what we're trying to accomplish, by which dates, and what our objectives are, what our goals are for work completion on each of those schools. Here's where we do have a very specific update regarding adjustments in the school buildings. On Group 1, we will be releasing the assessments of those schools by the end of the day tomorrow. Again, we have processed those contracts, and again, we will be working on the final detailed work plans that will release to the committee and the public over the next few weeks. But tomorrow, the assessments will be released by the end of the day. Those will be for public review. In terms of Group 2 and 3 buildings, we did receive 2 bids that are currently under review, and we'll reconcile those bids again against our goals and objectives that we spec'd out, and we'll have more updates for those soon. Again, the news on this more particularly, more immediate, is that tomorrow the assessments will be released. Going back to the internal factors, and we've touched upon this. I know this will be a topic of conversation every day as we move forward. The Board of Health's testing order was passed on November 2nd. We all know that. I believe we'll be discussing that tonight. To meet the Board of Health order, with the testing working group, again, which is made up of city and school staff here, is recommending a policy requiring that all students and staff be tested regularly and receive the flu vaccine. We all know the public health goals around this. We cannot have a major influx of traditional flu cases while we're in the middle of a resurgence. It will overwhelm our healthcare system. That is the danger. We're already seeing cases of COVID increase in our hospitals in general and in our ICU units. Here in Massachusetts, it may not be as dire by other states, but the trends are very clear. And this will involve a transmission prevention implementation plan as well. I just want to outline who is on the testing working group, because this was a question that came up before. Fair enough. I want to make sure we made it clear. Again, all decisions around testing are not made in a vacuum. made in context, given all the best available information and data that informs our policy decisions and decision-making. And these are the members of the testing working group. Obviously, myself and the superintendent play a role in this as well. The following slides really summarize the testing working group's recommendations, which are another layer on mitigation for the school reopening plan. And required COVID-19 testing is our best strategy really to keep students in school once in-person instruction begins. It's the only way, or the best way, we can know how it is happening regarding COVID in our school buildings. It cannot be one data point, but testing in real-time observation and surveillance will give us a better understanding if there's an outbreak occurring and allow us the best amount of runway to strategically contain any outbreaks in a school or even a classroom that allows perhaps to have instruction as we, even if we're in a high-risk situation. Again, these are the things I've outlined we'll be able to accomplish with the surveillance plan we would like to implement. Again, we'll be able to identify both positive individuals or asymptomatic and symptomatic. That's really important. We don't know, Massachusetts really doesn't know the number of asymptomatic cases, yet we see cases increasing in schools amongst students and staff. We can rule out COVID-19, again, for individuals who present COVID-like symptoms. But again, we can evaluate the effectiveness of a lot of our safety measures like 6-foot distancing protocols to inform our collective decisions as we move forward. I touched upon last time, we talked about this publicly, how we came to the decision to utilize a pool testing approach and the partners that we evaluated. As I mentioned, we evaluated 23 testing options against these criteria. I'm not going to put all those 23 options again. If people are interested, those are on the slide deck that was already made public from last week. But a few of the criteria we've highlighted were, again, flexibility, both for our, not just our testing partner, but the city and school district as well, as it becomes a, it's really important because we need to be ready to adjust, as we mentioned before, for better technology and testing, and the approach to testing is going to evolve. We have to have that flexibility to adapt. It has to be acceptable. Again, we eliminated this sort of brain scraper swab with the deep, uncomfortable nasopharyngeal swab, more the anterior swab now, and rapid results are also really important. Again, this information allows us to really make potentially infectious individuals, isolate them to prevent further spread of the outbreaks. The more information we have real time at our fingertips, the quicker we can move to strategically contain any spread and prevent any really major outbreaks. As you saw me mention at the last meeting, these are our two testing partners. I'm just going to click through this. We're using Ginkgo Bioworks, as I mentioned, for teacher testing because it's free and they're also effective. Baseline testing was mentioned before is key. It allows us to identify infectious individuals before in-classes begin. We have to know that. I think it's logical, then people get that. And the screening allows us to continue to maintain a safe environment over time and prevent really undetected outbreaks. And as I mentioned before, and I'll emphasize it again, symptomatic testing needs to happen on a sort of different track and provide people with symptoms priority access to our rapid turnaround individual tests. Again, we talked about Ginkgo with the staff. The testing schedule, as we touched upon last time, is here. Nothing has changed on that. How we're going to handle cohorts of students A and B in the days we're going to test. Again, our next steps in testing. There's a policy that is currently going before the school committee, as we all know, for consideration. That'll be the topic of conversation. Eventually, then subsequently, there'll be a transmission prevention implementation plan that will be finalized and presented to the school committee on November 16th. This implementation plan applies to any school in the city of Somerville, public and private. It's akin to a safety, COVID safety plan that any business operation would have in the city, but this will be critical as required by the Board of Health. And we can touch upon that a little later. But, it'll be a lot of decision making that'll happen as schools open, but having this testing information provide us, again, with the data that we really need to make the decisions necessary about further school openings and potential closures. I just want to touch upon the deliberation or decision-making, preliminary decision-making framework that continues to evolve. So this is the context and the framework we'll operate in. We believe, and once we have schools actually open for in-person learning, potentially not have to close, we may potentially not have to close because of the testing approach we're taking, because we'll have that information. The less information, have a more conservative our approach will have to be in terms of maintaining opening or opening at all. Again, we'll use a data from a host of sources, city, regional, and state, to help us understand the context of what is occurring with COVID. Decisions around groups 2 and 3 will be made for the schools will be made for the entire district. Decisions around school closings, as I stated here, will potentially be made on a school-by-school basis. We'll be able to, with the information in hand, act that surgically and that strategically. Again, we'll have to evaluate it depending on the context and situation of each school. But every decision, what's really important here to take away from this slide is done and be made in the context of public health, and will be made, as I mentioned in the previous meeting, collaboratively between the city and the school department, but under the lens of public health. All decisions again would be based on public schools data and informed in the broader context. We'll be evolving our dashboard to present that data. We're looking at a host of transmission prevention indicators. This will be all informing of how we make those decisions. And here's just an outline of some of them. The number of staff available to present to report in person. Our risk scores regarding ASHRAE, the percentage of test results returned within 36 hours, and we'll look at other CDC COVID mitigation measures. They all inform us on how we'll make those decisions. We'll be looking at various public health indicators, weekly case counts, the percent positivity. There should be of no surprise. How many of our classrooms are under quarantine in any one school? Again, and what is really the driving catalyst or source of any infection for positive cases? And we'll disaggregate that by public schools or household or even community. So we're looking at potential future indicators as well, and one is outlined here. Number of positive secondary infections from public school positives also. And again, there are other public health indicators we'll continue to monitor. We've seen these before. The 14-day moving average of cases is one we all know of, the percent positivity. What we want to continue to define community testing rates and capacity and contact tracing capacity and quality. That'll be critical in our ability to manage and understand and control the virus, and so it doesn't control us. So that gives you a little overview and flavor how we're looking at these indicators and defining them for you all or evolving. The more immediate updates were in terms of the buildings. I know there's matters for consideration this evening as they relate to the Board of Health orders. We continue to make progress, but I want to continue to also stress and clarify, if I haven't, we should be well aware of this, the situation on COVID is getting worse. Cases continue to increase here in the Commonwealth, in the community around the country, and we're seeing evidence now of hospitalizations increasing, again, ICU bed availability decreasing, and we'll continue to monitor this with our regional and colleagues and state agencies, as well as experts who continue to advise all of us. Those are all speak to the internal factors we need to continue to monitor as we ready the school building and building assets and physical plants themselves and ramp up the testing plans. And so that'll be information we'll continue to share with the public as we ramp up to try to get ready by the beginning of December. So I'm going to stop there, Madam Chair. That pretty much covers it. The updates of where we are. And glad to answer any questions, but I look forward to the conversation and public input.
Thank you for that. Pardon the noise. I was just printing up this public speaking list. If there are questions or comments from school committee members while we have the mayor and staff here, Ms. Barish?
Thank you. I'm just trying to turn my camera on. Thanks for that update, Mr. Mayor. I just wondered if you could clarify when you say that reopening of groups 2 and 3 will be made for the entire district. Do you mean that that wouldn't be done on a school-by-school basis, but would be done on the grade level basis that we set out in the reopening plan?
Sorry, I have a little trouble
Mayor,
here.
are you?
Can Can you hear me okay? I probably, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll comment as well, but defer to Mary and the team as well on that and the health team. Can you hear me? Because you seem frozen to me. Sorry.
Can we hear?
I hear you now. Sorry.
So, Ms. Barish, can you just repeat that again?
Yeah,
I just want to
sure.
make sure I'm answering the right question.
Yeah, of course. So Mayor Curtatone said that reopening of group 2 and 3 schools will be made for the entire district, and I just wanted to make sure I understood that. I think that what he meant was that, for instance, we wouldn't be sending students back based on their home school. We would be sending everyone in a given grade level back with their grade level cohort. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, so I mean, I can take a shot at that. So I think one of the things that we're waiting for is some additional information on the remaining buildings in terms of timeline to be able to think of what's possible January and beyond. But I think, UNIDOS is one of the outstanding decisions, programmatically bringing it back together. And so looking at East and what that timing looks like to keep coherence of the program. We're also just in terms of getting the feedback back from families. There's some possibilities within special ed that there might be, particularly our older students, waiting until January with the high school building being available. So some of those decisions will be made as a district once we get the rest of that information. So that's, yeah. So I mean, I think, yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you, Mary. I'm sorry, I didn't fully understand the question. Thank you for that.
Ms. Barish, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. So next up is Dr. Phillips and then Ms. Krupchen. Dr. Phillips?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that update. I really appreciate the way that the city and district's thinking on thresholds and metrics is evolving. I appreciate learning more about that. This is really just a nerdy researcher question through you, Chair. I think it might be to the superintendent, but I'm not sure. I'm wondering how we're thinking about operationalizing some of the COVID mitigation measures, which I think is really important to try to measure in terms of, are people actually wearing masks? Are they actually social distancing? But it seems very hard to me to try to do that. So wondering what your thinking is.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So we've spent a bunch of time working on the health and safety protocols for when students return. Everything from looking at sort of the best practice of what districts have been doing to the things that they've found to be the most difficult. So, positive incentives with masks, looking at, we've had signage made up so that all parts of the building have markings for students to be able to use all open spaces, but to show them what 6 feet looks like, to protocols relative to the cafeteria of food coming out, but giving them the ability to be able to eat and use open space, including the outside. Reminders to parents, SFLC is doing a big push on cold weather clothes, but really we want to get kids out as much as possible out of the buildings as they come in. So really trying to implement a lot of kind of the best practices and avoid the things that haven't worked or find ways to sort of mitigate them. And so we will continue to do that. We've done at this point a couple of trainings, and we will continue to work with staff on that, particularly as we go into the initial openings where we have our high needs special education, our English language learners doing a lot of translation into various languages of understanding, and asking parents to play a role too in talking with students about what to expect, and certainly mask wearing, practicing mask wearing. I mean, it's really all of us working together. We're all creatures of habit. So when students come back, they'll be used to school as they remember it. So some of that is going to be just really intentionally working with them on new habits, and staff as well.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely, go right ahead.
Maybe I'm misinterpreting what was on that slide. My read of what was on the slide was that we would be seeing how effective all of the policies and practices that we're putting in place are by seeing if people are actually wearing masks and actually staying 6 feet apart. But perhaps that's not the case. Could I just get a little clarity on that?
I don't
So
know.
that wasn't. Go ahead, Mary, I'm sorry.
No, I that was not my recollection of the slide and what the slide was referring to. I think in terms of audit, this will be something that when we go into buildings, it will be with those eyes of making sure, much like we do now, and we're doing with the outside classrooms, 6 foot, reminders of 6 foot, sanitation, mask wearing, those are all things that are happening actively within the buildings now, even with students just being outside. Roll that forward to now being in the buildings, and we will continue to do that. So, we've already had some conversations with central staff about a role they can play being helpful in going out to the buildings and, kind of working with principals if they see something breaking down, helping the principal to brainstorm how to be able to approach that a little bit differently. But really, this is going to be a lot about talking to students. We're creating social stories at many of the grade levels to kind of prep the students for this and what to expect. But it's going to be an ongoing process.
So if I can add, and thank you, and I always cheer a self-proclaimed nerd researcher because I'm a suppressed one. So I think what we have, that's not what the slide said. However, the point is a valid one and a great one. And I just don't recall if she's on this meeting now. If Kristen's still just the director of summer stats on the call, she may be able to speak to it. We haven't fully developed those measurements. How do we measure that sort of conduct? She might be able to, Chris, here she is. She may be able to appropriately add to that because I think it's a real good point, Dr. Phillips.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Hello, my name is Kristen Stelgis. I'm the summer stat director. And I do think it's really important that we think about for each of these indicators, how are we actually going to measure it? And so we're still in the process of figuring out what that might look like. I think we'll have to work closely with the principals and have some conversations about how we can get the feedback from them about what they're seeing in the schools and how successful they're being with things like masks and things like that, talking with DPW to talk about with the janitors and the cleaning protocols and how successful we are in implementing those as well. So it's definitely a work in progress, but it's something that's definitely on my mind, and we'll be talking with the team that's developing and fleshing out these indicators more fully.
Right. And educators and teachers as well, because teachers are going to see the students right up front every day, so they'll give us some great data.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Next I have Ms. Krepchen, then Ms. Patel, and then Dr. Ackman. Ms. Krepchen.
Thank you for that presentation. My question is about the metrics for when a decision might be made to close schools again in the future. And thank you for some more clarity about what those metrics may be, but I'm just curious of your thinking about the timing for when those kind of decisions will be made, recognizing that teachers and parents need time to plan. So I'm just wondering what the thinking is about how long of a lead time those kind of decisions will need to be made.
I'll start to answer the question. It's a good one and one that we continue to refine and evolve because it's complex, as you've alluded to. We'll work real time. We'll be looking at data on a daily basis. And certainly general health indicators and external factors put in the context of each school and school overall. And then those decisions will be made collaboratively, really at the direction of the health department. The timing, when we think about timing, your point is a good one because we were reminded by the superintendent and Chairwoman Norman about how you operationalize the timing and the impacts of that, whether it's closing a school or moving to the next phase or deciding to go back in. Admittedly, that's not fully clear at this point, but evolving. And so I'm going to hand off to finish my answer, either Mary or, again, I know Kristen's on the call, or Tim or Omar on the call as well. Tim Snyder. Mary, did you want to add to that?
We can't hear you, Mary.
Yeah, sorry, my mic went into mute. So yeah, Omar, I don't know if you want to chime in as well. I mean, I think, there's been a lot of indicators that have been listed, and I think part of the conversations have been about what those look like in the different ranges of low, medium, and high risk. But I think, the city is doing a lot of thinking about how these all kind of work together in conjunction to create safe environment or one that points to a more at-risk environment.
Right. So through you, Madam Chair, like the superintendent and the mayor expressed, we're trying to have or separate two systems, so the school district and then the community at large. And so looking at indicators within the community, we're looking at our daily case counts and then controlling that and using the rate per 100,000 to give us a sense of the raw numbers that are coming in, and trying to use that as a baseline to make decisions for the school district, but also injecting the school district testing data. So there is a very likely case scenario where the data within the two don't match. So we want to be able to get to a point where even if, please bear with me in this example, but even if the community data is, say, in the higher or high category, it may not be reflected in the school district. And so there's a case scenario where while the community data is high, we can still remain open on the school side because we don't see that reflected within the school system. So that's the approach we're trying to take, which makes it very complicated, both complicated and complex, to just draw one red line that says, at this number, we're out of here. So the two interact with each other. So that's the composite picture that we're trying to put together for the city and the school district.
And that includes, Madam Chair, the timeline. You know, what is the go, no go, I would just use on any one of those circumstances, and that is evolving with that. School's input is critical to that, obviously.
Thank you.
Ms. Cretchen, did you have a, no, you did not have a follow-up. Ms. Patone and Dr. Ackman?
Hello. Thank you, Chair Norman, through you to either the superintendent or the mayor. First, I want to thank my colleagues for their excellent questions. I keep crossing them off as I go along because I have similar ones. I'm very appreciative that we're creating some clarity around some of the parameters that we're going to be looking at. And that's it. And I understand how complicated it is. When do you think that we will be seeing kind of the next iteration of this? Like, because, you know, we're coming into this point where December 3rd is, you know, just a few weeks out. And so I want to hopefully set expectations around when we might see the next iteration that gives some more clarity on this. But again, I'm very appreciative of where we are and just thinking about timing. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Kristen and Omar, I mean, we're moving on this. Perhaps Kristen still, just an Omar can comment, and then I'll probably comment.
Yes, hello through the chair. So the team that's working on this is working very rapidly, and I think if you would be happy to, we can keep you posted and give you an update at the next school committee meeting. You know, I think we're going to finalize this as fast as we possibly can, but also want to make sure that we get time for our expert colleagues that we consult with to give us to validate it as well. And so some of the timing will depend on where we are with them. But Omar, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'm curious if that answered school committee member Patone's question.
With complete respect, I really appreciate that, but there's some point we have to decide if we don't have a certain level of clarity that we can't move forward. We know that, so that's my question, is that, you know, are we going to get some information before Thanksgiving? At what point will we, again, I don't want an exact date, I don't want to back anybody in a corner, but I want to make sure we're giving enough time for the community to have confidence, including our staff, in what the plan is.
Yes, the short answer is yes. We'll definitely have some before Thanksgiving. This exact question, should feel great about our chairperson, who was pounded away by her about an hour and a half ago. We appreciate that. So she keeps us all in line, and yes, we'll definitely get it before Thanksgiving. You can bet she was pushing for much earlier than that. I mean that with all due respect, Madam Chair.
I take it as a compliment. Thank you. Next, Dr. Ackman.
Thanks. I think my question's a little more micro, but my understanding is, you know, the first students to come back will be our highest needs students with a lot of disabilities. I presume some of those are kids who have some sensory issues and may have some challenges with someone coming at their nose in order to be swabbed. I'm wondering what our plan and our strategy is. You know, if those are the kids we need to meet and we're going to meet first, it's probably also going to be instructive for kids, you know, other kids as we open up more. I'm curious about what our strategy is for testing the kids who may have sensory issues or other things like that.
So Director Travisoni and the BCBAs and the special education department heads and facilitators have been in touch with parents to again help them understand sort of what to expect, what this is going to be like. If a situation is such that a student, the doctor feels it's too dramatic for that to happen for a student, there's a process by which they can write a letter and let us know that. But a lot of the parents have asked, can I just come with my student? I feel like that's something that will help my student become more relaxed, particularly in the first couple of times that they're going to be doing it. So there's just a lot of preparing students ahead, thinking about what might be the things that would comfort a student, but a lot of dialogue that's been going on within the special education community.
To that point, may I ask a follow-up?
Absolutely.
So oh, I think you answered this already. Forget it. I rescind my question.
If you have another one, you can get right back in the queue. Next up is Mr. Green.
Actually, my question does serve as a follow-up to Dr. Ackman's question, namely that given all of these moving pieces, given all of the complexity, given the incredibly diverse nature of our populations we're serving, what are the things we're doing to help explain all of that's coming, to prepare people for the testing regime? What are we doing, especially in the communities that have been hardest hit by COVID, to help them understand what we want to do?
So I mean, I can speak just to the general outreach that we're doing, and I don't know if if the mayor Omar want to speak to something more deliberate on the community side, but part of the reason we didn't just send a survey and we actually made phone calls to the families was to be able to have conversation and talk with them about what would happen with testing, and that would be a part of the return. Sometimes there would be additional questions asked that required somebody else to call back. So really just trying to make it as informative and as much of a dialogue with the community as possible. Tomorrow night from 5 to 6, there's a town hall for staff that Doug Kress and Omar and Amy will be at to specifically talk about the testing for staff so that they know what to expect. And then I can see us doing a similar thing for families so that they know as well a little bit further down. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is conversation to help people be aware of what the different types of tests are. There's a lot of debunking of, the mayor called it kind of the brain poke or the brain tickle for anybody that's, had that COVID test. And that, what we're proposing is much more non-invasive in terms of the saliva and for the staff, and then in terms of the lower nasal for students. So, again, it'll take one time through for students and staff to gain that comfortability, but the more we can talk about it and answer questions ahead of time, the better for all.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Green, or did you have a follow-up?
Well, one, I would love to hear more from the city side about the broader efforts, but also as a follow-up, going back to Mr. Tone's point about time is of the essence, right? Like, even Thanksgiving we can't make a decision on December 3rd by Thanksgiving. So given how fast we're gonna have to move to make a decision about opening on December 3rd, what are the efforts we're doing to make people understand where we actually are on this process?
I don't know if Omar was going to answer, but I first wanted to give context on the first part of it as well. So as I mentioned in a previous meeting, there is work between school department, city staff, immigrant services unit as part of that work to do that type of outreach to those populations, especially who have been, without question, overwhelmingly the hardest hit by COVID on many fronts. And I'll probably hand off to Omar and just elaborate since he heads up the ICS and talk about the immigrant services unit.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Madam Chair, to School Committee Member Green. The school side of the equation in terms of the outreach and the city and ICS side of the equation, and both have been trying to, because they've been working together for the last few months, trying to communicate as much information as possible to all those stakeholders. What is being planned, and this is my understanding now, things change on a daily basis in terms of scheduling, but we will have very specific meetings for very specific demographics in terms of language. And so we're making the entire staff available to answer any type of detailed questions, either through those meetings or, if need be, on a personal basis off schedule. So if people have more extensive questions, or they have an inability to attend, or are shy about attending, whatever the case may be, all they need to do is to communicate with the staff, and I'm more than happy to make myself available to answer those detailed questions. To answer the timeline and the time sensitivity aspect of that question, we have operations running in parallel. So the instructions that we've gotten from the principals, the entire leadership of the city, I don't make a difference between the city side or the school side, is that we needed to be ready for an opening in early December. And that's what has been our driving purpose, and that's been our motivator. So for all intents and purposes, we're trying to put all the tools together, and we're almost there from a practical standpoint to deliver on that. Now, the health data and the dynamics of the virus, unfortunately, is not something we can control. But we've been very careful about providing either final recommendations or driven recommendations towards a certain policy move until we have the most recent, the latest, and the most solid data we could have. So we're seeing trends. We're seeing a lot of movement around us, especially. We're seeing some movement here in the city, but we don't have a good read on the school system. And so the baseline test would be really instrumental in getting another layer of data to be able to inform that conversation.
Mr. Green, did that answer your question?
Almost. I think what I'm going to need, and it might just have to be done in writing because it's probably a level of detail that you don't have to your fingers, is really, like a memo, really details what the outreach has been. Like, we've reached out to X number of families, we've used X, Y, and Z as partners. Like that real level of granular detail, which I totally understand you don't have off the top of your head, but like that in a memo.
I wish I did.
Sure.
Okay. So we will look forward to getting some of that information. Superintendent, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that for the next school committee, we can certainly share the data that we have of all of the number of families that we've contacted from phase 2A, 2B, and 3A. You know, at this point, 2A and 2B have been done both by the SFLC and the special education department. 3A, which is the pre-K and the K, have been done at the local level with the principals and their teams. So, you know, interpretation has been critical. We added in 5 positions for interpretation and translation since the start of the school year. One, because we realized we needed bandwidth with multilingual. That's been incredibly important, as the SFLC being full-time. So there's been a tremendous amount of dialogue and outreach. I think what we're finding with families is that, you know, many want to come back. I think many people are looking at the virus, and they're watching like we all are to make a decision about whether or not they feel safe. So I think the more information we can give everyone, the better, for sure. And I think, you know, to the mayor's point and to Omar's point, I think there's, in addition to the buildings and the testing, there is this very real impact of the virus and what the virus is doing in the school community and the broader community. And I think that's what has to be and will be looked at in the coming weeks.
Thank you for that. Next up, I have Ms. Batone and then Dr. Phillips. Ms. Batone?
Thank you, Chair Norman, through you to the superintendent. This is completely related to what you were just speaking about. There's been a great deal of speculation in the community about who will be comfortable returning, whether from a student perspective or a staff perspective, whether it's tonight or at our next meeting on Monday. Can you share the status of surveys with staff, conversation with families, the level of feedback that you're getting, either now or next Monday? Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The one thing I will say is that I think the caution I will make about surveys is I think surveys are a moment of time. And I think in particular with this pandemic, it's even more so. And so we can certainly share the data, but and we will. But I just want to caution people that in speaking with my colleagues and watching what has happened when districts have reopened, there is often a change both ways. Some people more comfortable to come back and other people not as comfortable who said they were coming back. So I just, it's a moment in time and we have to treat it as that. And then we have to be prepared for it to go either other way, which is what makes this particular adaptive leadership challenge a challenge.
Thank you. It's an excellent caveat because we also know that communication today, a week from now, there's going to be more information from the district in terms of what the plans look like. There'll probably be more information from the city about the threshold. So I think that's either going to make people more confident or less confident. But again, it's knowing, like I said, there's people in the community that try to speculate about that and make guesses for people. And if we actually have some good information, that would be helpful.
Correct.
I have
You're
myself
muted,
muted.
Carrie.
So Ms. Matone, sorry about that. We all, I think everyone gets affected by that time to time. Thank you for that question, Ms. Matone, and I share your concern about making sure that as the situation evolves, that there is enough time as best we can for families and staff to know what to expect and to make plans. What we know is schools are wildly complex, beautifully complex organizations that have so much logistics that go beyond the classroom, right? It's transportation, it's food, it's so many variables. So it's we're not the most nimble of organizations, but we certainly I think that's a good thing because we have so much that we do. Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a point of clarification. I know we are expected to pass the policies related to the Board of Health order. Will we also be responsible for approving the plan, or is that something the school district will develop and implement on its own?
That is a great question, Dr. Phillips. So the Mass law is pretty clear. Policies on the school committee side, procedures are on the superintendent's side. Although we haven't seen to date, I don't think the superintendent has seen either. I know I haven't yet the city's recommended plans. So it's possible that it may just be implementation, but it's also possible that there might be policy questions. We have two policies tonight to be considered, the vaccine and then the testing policy. But as the plan is further developed, there might be policy considerations. So you are right to ask the question and to anticipate that. But typically our policies tend to be more broad, and then the implementation side comes under the superintendent.
Fantastic, thank you.
You're welcome. Do any of my other colleagues are there any more questions while we have the mayor and other city staff here to answer? Okay. Going once, going twice? No? All right. Well, thank you so much for all of that. So we will now move on to public comment. And then we will pick up the start to deliberate. I want to just highlight to the school committee members that there were some changes, some updates after talking with more people, more information, and so that the most recent up to iteration of the policies is, I think, in the handouts, and it was also, I believe, in the packet. It was updated by Ms. Santiago. So if you looked at it yesterday, there is a newer version today. So we're now going to move on to public comment. And who I have for that is Kinga Barandi, Julia Dolan, Neva Duran, Katarina Dutton, Margaret Whittier Ferguson, and JT Scott. You will each get 3 minutes max to speak. And before public comment, we always have to go over the rules. So welcome and thank you to those of you who have signed up for public comment. Speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to present the material. Usually it's 2 if we go over 6 people. Remarks should be respectful, professional, and addressing the chair. If a speaker persists in improper remarks, the chair may terminate that individual's right to continue. Public comment is not a discussion, debate, or dialogue between residents and the committee. Members of the committee will not reply to public comment in the course of the meeting. Though individual members may follow up and items from public comment may be taken up in future meetings. The school committee will not hear personal complaints of school personnel, nor against any member of the school community in public session. Individuals may address topics on the agenda or items within the school committee's scope of responsibility, such as the district budget, goals, policies, or the ruling of the superintendent. And the public is encouraged to submit comments in writing for inclusion in the public record. So first up is Kinga Barande. Kinga, are you here? And the floor is yours. Trying to see if you are muted. Kinga, are you there?
Yes. Kinga Barandi, 14 Landers Street. So my question is, so what's the rush? Why is Somerville so eager to return to in-person learning by December 3rd? Hard on the heels of a 4-day Thanksgiving break, a time when many people gather with family, friends, neighbors, and before the winter break, another time when people travel, gather, and meet. You all know the cases, the numbers. Cases in Massachusetts up 69% in the last 14 days. Deaths up 7%. I don't need to repeat them. So what's the rush? I've heard the argument that even 3 weeks of in-person instruction for our most at-risk children, special education students and multi-language English learners, will benefit greatly, allowing them to hone skills that they are learning online daily. But what happens when that student contracts COVID-19 and suffers permanent heart damage because the virus triggers Kawasaki syndrome? Or when the asymptomatic student infects an elderly grandmother, a pregnant mother, or everyone sharing the dwelling in the entire building? Because as we know, many buildings in Somerville are built 100 years ago, and there's no ventilation or airflow, and whatever virus is in the building on the 3rd floor permeates the entire structure and infects everyone living there. And have we become so cavalier that we just note the positive cases without remembering that they have a denouement, a development, and a progression? Medical experts have not isolated what triggers a huge response that could result in long-term disability and even death, nor does the medical community know what triggers a milder response to the virus. Sure, we can test, but to hear some school district administrators, they talk as if testing was the be-all and end-all, without recognizing that a positive diagnosis is just the beginning of the issue. And I ask again, what's the rush? In one of Mayor Curtitone's slides, he said that we will still be looking at how safety protocols affect transmission rates. So we don't know if 6 feet is what works. We don't know if mask wearing is what works. Yes, we know some of it, but it's still a process of working out whether this is going to be successful or not. Also, we're talking about the school community as if it existed outside of the greater community. We are the community, and we don't just exist in Somerville and in school buildings. We exist outside of Somerville. We exist outside of school buildings, and all of us are affected by a rush to in-person learning. And I don't believe we should go back. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Julia Dolan. Julia, the floor is yours. Julia, are you there?
Hello?
Hello.
Hi. My name is Julia Dolan. I'm at 93 Jake Street, and I'm a teacher at Next Wave Full Circle. I'm here to speak not about COVID transmission when we return as proposed in January, but about my and my colleagues' concerns about the effects that the necessary measures of hybrid learning will have on student engagement and participation in our therapeutic program. First of all, I want to say that despite the challenges and the strangeness of our times, I think we have a fantastic remote schedule due to our administration's planning. It's consistent, it's creative, and it works for staff and parents alike. It allows us to pull in students, clinicians into meetings in different contexts. We can have academic meetings with a full academic team in different settings, and it helps students have the executive functioning to get their work done. Attendance is up, and frankly, in some cases, so is work completion. As a trauma-sensitive school, introducing a major change during the holiday season, which is consistently the most difficult time for our students, sounds exhausting and hurtful to their progress, especially as we are not returning to normal school and may go to remote again after preparing students for the transition. Many staff have expressed concerns that seeing students only a few days a week and enforcing new distancing and mask rules will take a toll on relationships that right now are founded on seeing them every day. Also, part of our foundational system is dealing with crises as a team. So currently I pull in clinicians, favorite teachers, administration, anyone who can help support a student who's in crisis. In hybrid, because we'll have to be in separate cohorts, we think that instead of being a return to normal, it will actually escalate many students who are used to getting that communal care. As many of our students work retail jobs and have at-risk family members, trying to contain the virus and maintaining a lot of those COVID protocols will take a lot more precedence than it should. Our students at Next Wave Full Circle are more vulnerable to falling behind when there are major disruptions, and I hope that we can serve them to the best of our ability, which I believe is in continuing consistency in that trauma-sensitive space that we have created in the context that we can at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Next is Neva Duran and then Katarina Dutton. Neva, the floor is yours. Ms. Santiago, are you able to unmute her? I don't seem to be able to. There she is.
Thank you.
Hi. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Neva Durand. I live at 17 Kingston Street. First of all, I want to thank all the members of the school committee for your very hard work during this difficult time. I'm asking you tonight that you open the schools for 5 days a week in-person learning for young children, and that Somerville include the staff of out-of-school childcare and biweekly testing. Somerville children have now been out of school for 8 months. Neighboring public and private schools are open for in-person learning. Now that the city will spend many millions of dollars on HVAC and testing, we should recover this lost time and send young children back to school 5 days a week. There's no logic from a public health or education standpoint to hybrid. Ashish Jha, the Dean of School of Public Health at Brown University, has called deep cleaning, like the city proposes for Wednesdays, hygiene theater. Young children in schools are not driving transmission. Instead, community spread is happening outside of schools, in restaurants, gyms, hockey rinks, and indoor amusement centers that remain open. Hybrid means that children mix outside their cohorts on off days and thus are more likely to catch the virus and bring it back inside the schools. Finally, out-of-school childcare centers, such as the YMCA, have been absolutely essential to working families since the beginning, allowing parents to actually go back to work when the mayor kept the schools closed. Those workers should be protected via the same testing regime as for the public schools. Any center that has enrolled more than 10 SPS students since September should be eligible for twice-weekly testing of staff. Asking them to bear the brunt of the risk for months and then not protecting them now is deeply inequitable. I urge you to listen to the science, open the schools for 5 days a week in-person learning, and treat childcare staff as the essential workers they are and protect them via testing.
Thank you. Next, we have Katarina Dutton, then Margaret Whittier Ferguson, and then JT Scott. Katarina, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Katarina Dutton, 39 Lexington Avenue. I'm also a teacher at Somerville High School, and I'm in my 4th year. This is the hardest year of prep work and of teaching that I and most of my colleagues have ever experienced. We have all been working extremely hard to build routines for our students, to build in additional social and emotional learning to replace the lack of in-person contact students have had, and to help reduce the mental and emotional strain that students are experiencing this year. Even with our efforts, students are still reporting more anxiety than in previous years, unsurprisingly. However, I've seen across the quarter with my students, I've seen an increase in engagement. I've seen an increase in completion of work, in attendance, in settling out internet difficulties and settling out confusion as students become familiar with how the lessons are being taught and how virtual learning is working for us. Changing suddenly to a hybrid schedule is going to destroy that familiarity, destroy that sense of routine, and it's going to cause my students to have to relearn a new method of learning, as it were, new structures. This is going to add to their stress that they already have from the virus and from everything else, and they will, and in addition to their stress about the virus, they'll now have additional stress trying to remember a changing schedule, keeping track of whether or not they're supposed to be at the school or what classes they're supposed to attend on any given day, and trying to adapt to those new routines. Additionally, as a teacher, lessons are not interchangeable. Lessons that I created and prepared to teach in person a year ago cannot just be used as is to teach online. I need to change the length of time, I need to change the format, I need to change the teaching for it. Lessons that I'm creating right now to teach online cannot be used necessarily to teach in a hybrid classroom. Again, I would have to prepare new lessons. So as a teacher, every time we change methods, I have to lose valuable prep time, which could be used reaching out to students, providing feedback, developing their social and emotional lives, now has to go back into adapting my curriculum for a new way of learning. I don't think we're ready to go back in person. I think the numbers are going up in a way that is really scary, and I don't think should be what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Margaret. Are you welcome? Margaret, are you there? I don't know if she's self-muted.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Margaret Whittier Ferguson. My address is 9 Hilton Terrace in Roxbury, and I'm a pre-K paraprofessional. A 4-year-old child said to me the other day in morning meeting, "People are getting sick again." And he's right. COVID numbers are literally skyrocketing. How is it that 4-year-olds in my class can understand this, but the school committee and mayor don't seem to? I am the union building representative at the Capuano, and part of my job is to field questions from 70 or so educators that work there. I cannot begin to express how concerned many educators are. I have gotten so many phone calls this week from educators in tears and panicking because they are worried about their health, the health of their loved ones, and the health of our students and their families. Educators want the best for our students, and right now, that means continuing remote learning. I understand that you all say that there is a plan, but this feels like the district is not acknowledging the fact that we are in a second wave of COVID. This so-called plan is rushed and does not consider the expertise of educators, many of whom have dedicated their adult lives to these children and will ultimately be risking their lives if our schools reopen when it's unsafe. The survey sent out to educators is, quite frankly, ridiculous. I was asked whether I was going to go in or not, and if not, what leave I will be taking. I cannot take a leave, nor do I want to. It would be absolutely devastating to have to leave my students who I've built strong relationships with through remote learning. This is not a survey in good faith. It does not assess how comfortable educators feel. Where is the space for comments and questions? The response to concerned educators has been that they have been given all the information that exists, and this simply isn't a good enough response. Our students are in Zoom school 5 days a week, and it's consistent. They have small group instruction, and they are engaged, and many of them are doing quite well. Educators were tasked with figuring it out, and we're doing just that. The state and country is in the red and rising. The holiday season is upon us, and the risk for spreading infection by going back to school outweighs the benefits of having children attend school for just 2 days a week. And there are already cases of COVID in our school community. In a year when teachers have been striving to build community in an incredibly challenging environment, our students need consistency. I am very concerned about returning in December and urge the school committee and district to reconsider their plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker tonight is City Councilman JT Scott. JT, are you there?
Hey. All right, thank you. City Councilor JT Scott, I'm sorry, I'll keep this very brief because I am 7 minutes late for our Open Space and Environment Committee meeting, although I'm happy to wait in line here. Thanks everybody. I want to thank especially my school committee member, Ms. Krepchen, for bringing up this question about specificity and metrics regarding reopening and closing of the schools. I'll come back to that point in a second, but just speaking as an individual parent, remote schooling is working great. My 5-year-old knows her kindergarten routine. She knows when math class is. She looks forward to PE. She loves her teacher. She draws little hearts on the assignments that she submits online for them. She knows her classmates, continues to get to know them better every day. Those connections are forming and they are real, and it is a stable routine. And while she understands the world right now is a very difficult place and she misses getting to play with her friends, she understands what we're doing in this moment. So just speaking as a parent who's in this remote system right now, I see it working very well for a large number of students. Certainly not all, but at least for mine, it's great. Speaking also as somebody who intends to keep their child in this remote model, regardless of what happens with facilities here in the short term, based on both personal family situation and the regional health metrics, I am concerned about the disruptions that will happen in that kind of transition, and I appreciate the faculty that have come and spoken on those points. Speaking maybe more in the perspective of the city councilor, I continue to remain concerned about regional metrics. The wastewater testing data from the MWRA is at its highest levels now, matching those of the peaks that we reached in April. But I'm also deeply concerned about how the decision was made not to prioritize the East Somerville Community School in our renovation and reopening efforts, even if it's just a matter of when these schools are prepared. Part of my concern, again, comes from the disruption of how far people have to travel to take their children to school, their access to transit, which is much lower in East Somerville, and again, the disruption to families. So right now on the slides we in the public see, only difference between our Genziano, which is my community school in the east, is a very small fractional number that I don't know the source of. Without more transparency into the work that is needed as determined by the Fitzmyer and Tachi study, it's utterly impossible for me to explain to my constituents or my family or myself why this choice isn't just a reaffirmation of, well, maybe to put it more delicately, isn't another expression of how the residents of East Somerville aren't prioritized. So I want to just close by saying I echo the concerns that have been brought up by several people in the school committee about the specificity in the metrics that are needed for reopening and closing. We saw in Boston how even with a hard line metric in place, they were slow to respond to it. And while I understand and appreciate the approach of let's do very specific surveillance in our schools so that we can know exactly where those problems are, I think there still need to be explicit hardline metrics in place so that when we get those tests returning, as we see them, that we have some certainty for educators and families alike. I am deeply sympathetic to the concerns and uncertainty and fear, quite frankly, that is rife amongst the educators that I speak to. I think they deserve better. So I appreciate the hard work everybody's going through, and I just plead for more specificity and more transparency, as well as more solid metrics. So thank you. I'm all set.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge City Councilor Mark Niedergang from Ward 5 is joining us here tonight, and it's I always think it's helpful when the bodies have some idea of what each other are doing, especially in this complex age of COVID. So that concludes public comment. We are now going to consider the Board of Health testing order and to discuss the flu testing policy and the COVID-19 testing policy. I am going to suggest that we take the seasonal flu one first. Superintendent, unless you have any opinion on which one do we do first?
No, that's fine, Chair. That's your preference.
All right. And so there, again, if any of my colleagues looked at it yesterday, the more current one is what's in the handouts. It's also in tonight's packet. And so is there someone who would like to read it, or I could do the first read? Actually, I think we first need a motion. No. Okay, it's been a really, really, really long day. Is there someone who would volunteer to read the motion?
You mean read
the seasonal vaccine requirement? Yeah.
It's Alana, I'll do it. Or oh, Emily's got it. All right.
Here goes nothing.
Okay. And thank you, Ms. Bears, for volunteering for the next one.
Okay, let me find it. I just opened it. So you're asking me to read the contents of it?
Yes, I would like the public to hear it, and then if we get a motion in a second, and then we will commence deliberating.
Wonderful, thank you. The seasonal flu vaccine requirement. All students must receive an influenza vaccine per the Massachusetts school immunization requirements. 2020/2021 school year. Massachusetts school immunization requirements are created under the authority of 105 CMR 220.000, immunization of students before admission to school. In Somerville, this vaccine must be received prior to returning for in-person learning. Additionally, per the Massachusetts school immunization requirement, 2020/2021 school year, in order to remain enrolled in the Somerville Public Schools remote learning, students must receive the influenza vaccine by December 31st, 2020. All immunization documentation should be returned to the school nurse. All teachers, staff, and any other individuals providing services in the Somerville Public School buildings must receive an influenza vaccine prior to returning for in-person learning per the CDC's recommendations. All immunization documentation should be returned to the Human Resources Department. Exemptions to the flu vaccine requirement will only be granted for documented medical reasons. To receive the medical exemption, the individual must provide a written statement from a physician stating that a vaccine is medically contraindicated for the individual.
Thank you. Is there a motion to consider this?
So moved. This is Sarah.
Andre Green, seconds.
There's a motion by Dr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Green. Can we get a roll call vote to consider it?
Wait, are we voting on it or are we just discussing it?
No, we're not. I'm jumping the gun. Hello, Ruby. It's very nice to see you. And thank you.
We said hi to both of you.
Acklin. I always love when children or animals pop in. So I just want to really highlight this both for my colleagues, but also for the public. This is coming from the state, and the part that I think that it's mandatory to get a flu vaccine by December 31st, the part that I really want people to understand, and this is a state requirement, is in order to remain enrolled in the Somerville Public Schools remote learning, students must receive the influenza vaccine by December 31st. So whether you are choosing to come back in person or whether you are choosing to stay remote, the state has been very clear with districts. I am hoping that there might be some reconsideration that if you want to stay enrolled, even if you're remote, you still need to get the flu shot. Yes, and I'm sorry about asking for motions. This is the first reading and we are deliberating. So I open up the floor to my colleagues to speak to this. Dr. Phillips?
Thank you, Chair. This is also just a point of clarification here. Did we pass policy JCLB, the immunization policy, previously, or just get it through the first reading? I ask because I just get worried when we have two policies addressing the same thing, two different policies addressing the same thing.
That is a great clarifying question. So I have chosen to introduce this as a separate motion because it has to do with if you even choose to stay remote, the state is now saying that. And then what I would hope to do is if this passes or some amended version of it, that we would then go back and revise our current immunization policy. It does not have the same language about the remote in it. So currently, I mean, if you are, Dr. Curley, would you like to comment? Did you have some perspective you wanted to share? Is that why you popped up?
Through you, Madam Chair. So JLCB is the policy. We will check if that has been fully updated and amended. It's not on the website right now, so I'm afraid it might still be in first read, but it's only dealing with student inoculations. And this obviously deals with both staff and students. And we felt that given that this is kind of a unique amendment to COVID per the governor's orders, that it would make sense to be a standalone policy. We can obviously reference the student inoculation policy, but because this is both a recommendation for staff and students and it's in response to the pandemic, we thought it might make sense for it to stand alone.
Thanks.
Dr. Phillips, I very much appreciate you bringing up that question, whether it was still at the first reading or whether we had voted on it. I will be honest, I need to look back and find out if that policy was also just at the first reading. We can then add it to next Monday's regularly scheduled school committee meeting. But that is a great detail. I rely on all of you so much. Thank you. Mr. Green and then Ms. Kretchen. Mr. Green?
Thank you. So my question is actually pretty straightforward. I'm a big fan of this, but my question is mostly for I think you actually answered it. It was mostly about what is the difference between this and why we need to pass it when state law already is superseding? Why do we need a policy for it, since it seems to be a one-year policy? And I heard correctly, the answer is basically because we're also covering teachers and staff this year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great.
That is correct. Ms. Krepchen?
I think this may have already sort of gotten answered, but just from a procedural point of view, trying to understand if essentially the state is already saying we have to do this, we're creating our own policy because we're adding to it. Is that correct? I'm just trying to understand why we need our own policy if the state is saying this is what you have to do.
Dr. Curley, did you want to jump in on there, or do you want me to take that?
Just a point of clarification on this. So the governor's order deals only with students being vaccinated with the flu, and that's a December 31st deadline. So from our standpoint, I think it presents two challenges to ensuring the safety of our full community. Obviously, in bringing students back before December 31st and staff back, we want to make sure that everyone is fully vaccinated, and it apply to both students and staff.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Mayor or Superintendent, did either of you want to add any comments onto this policy?
No, Mr. Curley actually answered it. I was going to add an answer, but he answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next is that was Ms. Krepchen. Ms. Batone.
Hi, it's Laura. I apologize, I'm not on the video. I'm having some technical difficulties. You can hear me, correct?
Yes.
So I had two questions. If this is I don't know what I'd call a temporary policy with reference to the COVID-19 pandemic, none of the language in the policy references the pandemic, so I would make a recommendation or to just, due to the whatever language you want to use. So that was one point. The second question I have is there isn't, if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I don't think there's any reference to religious exemptions. Right now it says exemptions will be granted for documented medical reasons. I just was curious. I think in other circumstances, we've also included religious exemptions. I just want to put that out there. Obviously, I'm not a public health expert, but I want to put the question out there.
That is correct. It is not in this policy as it stands. I don't know if the Mayor, did you want to say something?
I'm happy to comment through you. I'm happy to comment. I support the exemption, religious exemption, not being in there for the following reason. While we respect one's religious beliefs and preferences, we are in the face of an unprecedented health epidemic. We know that in crisis, and the greater good and health and well-being of the general public, I submit, and others agree, takes priority over all that. And we need as many people as inoculated from the traditional flu for the reasons that have already been well stated and supported based on evidence and science and health. And that's why I would support it as is. And that is also why we strengthened the governor's orders as it applies to the city of Somerville and schools.
Thank you for that. Mr. Green, did you have a comment?
Yes, I wanted to point out that despite the radical religious exemptions, few to no religions worldwide, certainly with any meaningful population, actually oppose vaccines. The religious exemption argument is a cover for anti-vaccine propaganda, and I strongly support it not being in this policy.
Yeah. I mean, and we require immunizations, all the other immunizations for students that are coming into the schools as well. And as the mayor said, it's a pandemic. So we want to make sure that all students and staff are as safe as possible. This will help us get there.
Thank you for that. Ms. Krepchen?
Thanks. I just want to say I agree with all who have said that we shouldn't have religious exemption. My question, or just a clarification to make sure I understand. So the state is saying that we have to have all children vaccinated, whether we're remote or in buildings. And we are choosing to add on to that, that we expect all of our staff and anyone in the building to be vaccinated before returning to in-person. But that doesn't apply in any way to remote, correct?
Correct, right? It's referring to in-person learning with staff. The students, and this is an important point for parents to understand, the state regulation says that in order to be enrolled in the Somerville Public Schools,
right,
students have to be vaccinated. So they can actually not participate in our remote learning. In order to stay enrolled, regardless, they have to be vaccinated. That is the state regulation.
Can I just ask a follow-up, Carrie?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if this is necessarily appropriate conversation to this right now, and you may not even have the answer, Mary, but I'm just curious if we know at this point how many of the students in SPS that are enrolled have already gotten a vaccine?
I don't know that off the top of my head. That would be data we would have to cull with Mr. Kress and the school nurses, since they're keeping track of the vaccinations.
Okay, thank you.
Look, there's Mr. Kress.
Welcome, Director of Health and Human Services.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for the question. We can pull some of that data, but keep in mind what we do is we do a nightly exchange with the MIS system, which is the state data system on immunizations. So we will be able to have that. There are some people who are getting their vaccines that may be delayed in getting that reported into the MIS, but we can give you whatever data we have available to us.
Okay.
Mr. Kress, can you explain what that alphabet soup is and how that reporting structure works? So if someone gets a vaccination at CVS or at their own doctor's office, does that automatically come to you, or is there further steps that a family member or a student would need to take?
Sure. Thank you for the question. The MIS system is the state's immunization registry. Anybody who would get a vaccine, you usually have to apply, and also, or whenever you get your vaccinations, you usually have to sign off on those. In part of that sign off is saying that it will be uploaded into the MIS system or the state's tracking system. So make sure that everybody's immunizations are there. It makes it much easier. So if you change physicians, if you change even locations, you're able to refer those back and forth, and it just keeps track of all of those. Once you do get your vaccinations, all of your vaccines are registered, including the lot number and where you got it, how you got it, so that we have clear information about that vaccine because there's a problem with it. And then what will happen is we then download that information into the students' records. And that goes into the student health records, not into the school records, so that we have that information, which remains confidential within the data that we have available to us. However, we're able to run reports, and that's why we really encourage everybody to submit all of their medical information they need to their school nurse prior to coming back to school, and our nurses are ready for it. Please submit it. You can fax it in, or you can drop it off, and we'll be able to get that information in if you have immunizations that were done outside of the regular system, whether it might have been when you were visiting somebody in a different state. So we can also add all of that data into the system as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Cresswell, we still have you. I know that there has been numerous flu shot clinics at the schools. Are there any currently scheduled or any in the future more? How can the public make sure that they get the shot?
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. We actually just had a wonderful flu clinic this Saturday over at Trump Field. It was great. What we're doing right now is we're actually trying to go through all of the schools and really identifying those who are at high risk of not getting the vaccine or who need it a little bit sooner. But we're also finding there's a lot of students who are short on other vaccines that they may need as well. So we are going to be doing a variety of clinics here at the Annex, which will be drive-through clinics, so that we can make those available for everybody, because we have other vaccines that are available as well that we store here, and we're able to track all of those. So they should be watching out from with an email from their nurses, their school nurses, about when those would be available.
Thank you. And then to get, I'm keeping you right here because you have such good information for us. To get to Mr. Green's point earlier in terms of the announcement of the flu clinics have been translated and pushed out to throughout the community?
Absolutely. Thank you. And absolutely, we do translate everything into multiple languages. We've done it in a variety of ways, including through our Summer Viva program, also with the schools when we've done them through our variety of schools that we've already held them at. And we also have translators at each of the clinics as well. So if we need to translate anything, we have that available for individuals.
Thank you so much for that plethora of information and for doing the clinics and making it as convenient as possible. Do we anticipate that as we reopen, that there will be flu clinics connected to schools? Or I know we don't have the details yet, but is there sort of a broad plan on how that can be done conveniently for families and staff?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we've been able to do that in a variety of places. And again, like I said, we're going to do some evaluations because a lot of people have already gotten their flu vaccine, which is fantastic. People are on top of it. We've already held several clinics. So now we're kind of doing a little bit of cleanup and making sure that those that have missed out on it, that we're able to connect with them because they may be missing other vaccines as well. So we're trying to catch everything all at once. If we find that there's a larger grouping in a particular school, we will definitely do that. And be able to do some follow-up with that and those individuals as well.
Thank you. Mr. Kress, can you hold on because Dr. Ackman has a question or a comment for you? Dr. Ackman?
Thank you. I am curious about, so I and my spouse actually did the drive up flu shot this weekend. It was a very quick, lovely experience. So for families that do it and then need to collect the documentation, how is that happening so they can turn it over to the school, or are you turning it over to the school?
We have already,
the district? You've already worked that out?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we've already worked that out. Again, anybody who has the vaccine and when you're signing up for permission for it, that usually means that it would be uploaded into the MIIS system automatically. So we already have that. In fact, we have staff who are entering that information today.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sticking with us on a very long day, I'm sure for you. For my colleagues, are there any more questions or comments or pieces of information that you would like to be gathered and provided to us before next Monday's second reading? And if you think of things, I mean, we have a number of items, but if you think of things that would help facilitate this meeting next week, please send your questions directly to me so that we can make sure that we have all the information we need readily available for next Monday's second reading and anticipated vote on this. Thank you for that. So the next item of business is the Somerville Public Schools COVID-19 testing policy. Ms. Barris, would you be willing to read this for us, please?
I would. I'm just opening it right now. It's going to take just a second because my computer is slow. Okay. I just want to confirm I should not read the crossed out this.
That is correct. The policy would start fourth paragraph, the availability of in-person instruction.
Perfect. And I will turn on my camera also. Okay. Somerville Public Schools COVID-19 testing policy. The availability of in-person instruction and the district's in-person health and safety implementation guidelines will be determined and continually assessed using up-to-date data and guidelines provided by the Somerville Board of Health and Health and Human Services Department, Centers for Disease Control, CDC, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, and the Massachusetts Department of Health. When families select in-person instruction, they agree to and understand the health and safety expectations as outlined by the district, including but not limited to wearing a mask, participating in COVID-19 screen testing, and abiding by social distance guidelines. COVID-19 screen testing will be non-invasive to the extent possible. The Somerville Board of Health passed an order on November 2, 2020, requiring all K-12 educational institutions in Somerville, including Somerville Public Schools, submit to the Board of Health a COVID-19 transmission prevention plan that requires ongoing testing of all teachers, employees, and any other individuals providing services in the school buildings, and provides a detailed testing protocol to identify and swiftly isolate asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic, and symptomatic students who are COVID-19 positive. The Board of Health order allows for exemptions to COVID-19 testing in K-12 institutions only for those individuals who have a health contraindication documented by a physician. This policy will be used to inform the SPS COVID-19 transmission prevention plan required by the Board of Health order, which will be regularly reviewed to ensure it is responsive to the status of COVID transmission in the Somerville Public Schools and the region. COVID-19 testing. The Somerville School Committee sets as policy that all faculty, staff, other employees, and any other individuals providing services in the Somerville Public School buildings will be tested as a baseline before in-person learning begins and through a regular screening protocol thereafter as established by the COVID-19 transmission prevention plan. Students will be tested as a baseline before they are permitted to return to school in person and through a regular screening protocol thereafter as established by the COVID-19 transmission prevention plan. A child or staff member shall be exempted from the requirement for mandatory COVID-19 testing if a nurse practitioner, physician, physician assistant determined that it is not possible due to medical conditions, disability, sensory concerns, tactile sensitivity, or other health or safety factors for the student or staff member to participate in COVID-19 testing.
Thank you, Ms. Barish, for reading that. Any of my colleagues, questions or concerns, comments on this policy? Dr. Phillips?
Thank you. I have a bunch. You can let me know if you want me to do them all at once or one at a time. Sorry. The first one.
And if there's no one else behind you, then we'll just go down your list. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you. The first one is, I think, a no-brainer. I'm assuming that just like we do for most medical tests, an adult is going to have to fill out a consent before this happens, and therefore that doesn't need to be in the policy. Is that
Correct.
true?
Yes.
Want me to get back in the queue or keep going?
Why don't you do another one? And
Okay.
then
This one is maybe more substantive. As I've talked about before, I'm concerned about the unintended consequences of this policy. I know the district is doing fantastic outreach and so has really good data on how people are responding. And I'm wondering, would it be too much of a burden on the district to amend the policy to ask the district to report to the school committee at some regular interval about who is not consenting to participate and why? Just so we can keep track of why people might not be doing this.
Sure. Jeff, Dr. Curley, you want?
And then Mr. Long, if you'd like to comment on that. Dr. Curley?
I would just say through the chair, one of the things we've talked about with the city is adding to the district's reopening data dashboard a sense in aggregate of the total number of tests, the total number of positives, total number of negatives. And I think that might be a place where, again, in aggregate, without betraying anyone's individual medical information, we could offer the community a sense of the overall participation rate.
Yeah.
Attorney Long, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, Mr. Curley did a fine job with it. He's got an excellent legal analytical mind.
Thank you for that. I would encourage all of my colleagues, if there are amendments, concerns that you, as you read it and as you hear from constituents, please come prepared next week with it. We are never have been good at group wordsmithing. So if there are amendments that you want to suggest, please come prepared with the language as best you can. Ms. Barish, and then I'll come back to you, Dr. Phillips. Ms. Barish?
Thank you. I have a question, and I think I raised this at an earlier discussion of this issue, but I'm curious about how the schools can dictate testing in people who are not employees of the schools or students at the schools. For example, it says, it says any other individuals providing services in the Somerville Public Schools buildings. And I'm thinking specifically, for example, about the contractors who will be working on some of the buildings while the schools are open to students and staff. So I'm just wondering how, my sense is that will have to be managed from the city side because the contract will be between the city and those organizations. I'm just wondering about how that'll be managed.
That's an excellent question. It also, the nurses and the DPW staff are not school employees. They're on the city side, but they also are in the buildings. Mayor, would you like to comment on this question?
Yes, to you. Thank you for the question. Valid question. Brief, and I don't know if a similar question was asked before. Any city staff, the city oversees in a school building will have to abide by the order. We will, we'll be dealing with any bargaining issues if they apply to it directly, but the order will apply to them. And in terms of anybody not involved in a collective bargaining unit contract, that we'll deal with in terms of the construction of the contract if it applies to them that we design and execute with them.
And I would just add through you, Madam Chair, I would just add that any of our partners that are coming into the schools, such as our embedded counseling organizations, our tutors, our student interns, any of them, citizen schools, we've already had some of these conversations to say that this would, this as well as the flu vaccination would be conditions for in-person.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Barish?
It does, thank you.
I'm going to go to Ms. Krepchen and then I will return to Dr. Phillips. Ms. Krepchen?
Thank you. My question is, what about pre-K? I know that wasn't in the official board order, but we have pre-K students and I don't think it's mentioned in the policy. So I'm wondering what our thinking is on that.
Superintendent, did you want? Yes, please.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. So, I mean, I think for as relative to the district, it would be to include our pre-K students. You know, I think any students that we're servicing as some of our public school students would be included as for the same rationale relative to the testing.
Okay. So does it need to say that in the policy that we're including pre-K students, or is that implied? I'm just not sure procedurally.
I think it's implied when we say students are pre-K through 12 and beyond, pre-K through 22. Although, Attorney Long, would you like to comment on this?
Just briefly, I think a friendly amendment would remove any ambiguity about that.
And I would also encourage it to say 0 to 22, just because we do have students who go to age 22 for transition services.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. So that may be an amendment homework assignment. Back to you, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you. Just a question about parents. I know, right, because of COVID, we want to keep parents outside of schools as much as possible. Testing's happening in schools, but I could imagine many parents feeling much more comfortable having their preschooler or their child with sensory issues get tested if they were present. And I wanted to know how you felt about including that in the policy or the plan. Love the thinking.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair. So I had said earlier, this was actually something that parents have asked, particularly for students that do struggle with sensory or just past trauma that, you know, for parents, they feel like they could be a real asset and comforting to the child, which they would be. We don't have any issue with that. So I don't necessarily know that it has to go into the policy. I think that that's more the procedural. And that would be something we would include as an accommodation for parents to come.
Thank you.
And Superintendent, I'm aware that we haven't, all of the procedures haven't been developed, but is it likely the testing would be happening outside, or if a parent wanted to in the spirit of trying to minimize the number of people actually in the building, do you anticipate there'll be some flexibility on the delivery of these tests?
Yeah, so through Madam Chair, and Dr. Curley can weigh in on this, or Director Kress. I mean, right now we're looking at the gyms as the internal. I think we could definitely, we picked the gyms because they have exits. So I think we could actually, set it up so that were a parent to come with a child, there could be something set up closer to the door to minimize the parent having to come in.
Mr. Kress, would you like to weigh in on this?
Through Madam Chair, I think the superintendent did a great job of answering that question.
Thank you. So I would, it's always weighing what the needs for the entire community with some accommodations for some individuals to be able to make sure that they can also participate. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions, concerns, or comments on this policy from any school committee members? Going once, going twice. I anticipate that at our regularly scheduled meeting next Monday, the 16th, that we will consider both of these policies with a second reading with the intention of voting. And also to Dr. Phillips' question, I will see if we left it at that immunization policy at the first reading or whether we have taken it to a vote. If it was only a first reading, then I will also add that to the agenda. Any other parting remarks from anyone? Well, I want to thank everyone for attending and participating in another meeting on short notice. I also want to acknowledge the vast number of our educators who, after working a very long day, joined us through this meeting tonight. And on behalf of the entire school committee and the many, many parents of Somerville, we really do want to thank our educators. It is, remote learning is not easy, but I can, as a parent, I am astounded and deeply grateful for the quality of it. And with that, I'm going to say this meeting is adjourned and we will reconvene the full body next Monday. And just a reminder to school committee members that we have a 7:30 a.m. executive session tomorrow. All right. Be well.
Sorry, wait a second. We don't have an executive session tomorrow. We have a personnel subcommittee.
Personnel.
Session is on Friday.
Correct.
And
Personnel.
on Friday. It does take a village to keep a calendar straight. So thank you for that, Ms. Krepchen. I will see you all at 7:30 tomorrow morning. Be well.